Neighbors said Niels Krogh had finally lost his senses when he began cutting a gutter around his cabin. Not a garden trench, not a foundation trench, not an irrigation ditch. A gutter. 30 inches wide, shoulder deep in places, curving around the cabin like a dry moat in the middle of the San Luis Valley. It was September of 1892. Other men were stacking piñón wood, patching roof seams, and packing straw against their walls before the high country winter came down. Niels was not adding anything to his house. He was taking earth away. Wagons slowed on the county track. Children came barefoot to the fence line and stared. Men who had survived blizzards, droughts, grasshoppers, and bad loans shook their heads at the Danish settler kneeling in the dirt with a string line, a shovel, and a little brass weight swinging from twine. Caleb Rusk, the county ditch watcher, finally stopped his horse beside the claim. "Niels," he called, "if you are trying to make a moat, you picked the driest valley in Colorado." Niels leaned on the shovel. His shirt was dark with sweat. His palms were raw enough to leave spots on the handle. "It is not for water," he said. That made Caleb laugh. A ditch that was not for water sounded like a stove that was not for fire. "Then what is it for?" Niels looked past him toward the eastern rim of the valley, where the Sangre de Cristo peaks already held a white dusting of early snow. "For the thing that comes down after dark," he said. Caleb followed his eyes, saw only empty air, and made the same judgment almost everyone else had made. The man was frightened of winter, and fear had turned him strange. But Niels Krogh was not building a wall against the cold. He was building a road for it. This is a story about one of the oldest kinds of intelligence, the kind that does not overpower nature, does not argue with it, and does not pretend it can win by force. It watches where a force already wants to go, then quietly gives it a better path. If that kind of forgotten practical wisdom is why you are here, subscribe to the channel. And as you watch, think about this question. What problem in your own life got worse only because everyone kept fighting it head-on? Niels had never been a natural farmer. He owned 40 acres on paper, a milk cow that disliked him, and a team of mules he trusted more than most men. He could plant potatoes and barley well enough to keep his family alive, but soil under seed was not the ground he understood best. The ground he understood was ground that moved. Before America, before Colorado, before the high valley and the thin winter light, Niels had worked on the wet farms of Jutland. He had been the man called when cellars sweated, when stone footings shifted, when spring melt crept under a barn and lifted the floor like a breathing chest. He had learned drainage from old men who never called it engineering. They called it listening. They taught him to read clay by the way it broke from the spade, to know gravel by the sound it made under iron, to judge a fall in the land with a string, a plumb bob, and patience. They taught him that water did not need to be defeated. It needed to be invited away. A trench, to Niels, was never just an absence of dirt. It was a sentence written into the ground. It told of force, not here, there. When he brought his wife, Maren, and their 6-year-old daughter, Lise, to the San Luis Valley, he brought that old habit with him. He brought it quietly, the way poor men carry useful things, without announcing them. The first winter nearly broke the family. The cabin stood on the open valley floor, where the land looked flat until sunset proved it was not. During the day the sky was enormous and bright. The snow on the peaks flashed like hammered tin. But after dark, the warmth vanished with a violence no wall could answer. The cold did not seem to arrive from outside. It rose from below. Maren would wake before dawn and see white frost feathered along the floorboards. The iron latch on the door burned her fingers. The water bucket inside the cabin carried a gray skin of ice. The stove could be glowing, The ceiling could feel almost warm, and still the boards under the table felt like river stone in January. Lee's coughed through the nights. Not the quick cough of a child running in cold air, but a deep, dragging cough that made Niels lie awake and count the spaces between breaths. He had built the cabin himself. Every gap between the logs felt like an accusation. So he did what every other man did. He chinked harder. He packed mud into seams until his knuckles split. He nailed canvas over the north wall. He banked soil against the foundation until the cabin looked half buried. He burned wood as if fire alone could buy forgiveness. And every morning, the same white frost appeared along the floor. That was the misery of the valley. Everyone could see the cold, but almost no one understood its shape. They treated it like an animal trying to claw through the walls. They made the walls thicker. They made the doors tighter. They hung blankets over windows, stacked manure against foundations, shoveled snow where snow would lie, and prayed for wind, because wind at least broke up the stillness. But the worst cold did not come with wind. It came on clear nights when nothing moved. At sunset, the ground began losing heat into the open sky. The air touching the ground chilled first. Cold air is heavier than warm air, so it sank and spread. From the foothills, from shallow draws, from the dark shoulders of the mountains, it slid downhill like invisible water. The valley filled from the bottom. Their cabins in the basin, and on still nights they were not merely standing in cold air. They were submerged in it. A cabin foundation on that floor acted like a low dam. The heavy cold air drifted toward it, piled against it, pressed through every small gap, and chilled the soil beneath the room. The stove sent heat upward, where heat naturally wanted to go, while the family lived with their feet in a trapped pool of freezing air. That was why the floor stayed cruel. That was why doors sealed with frost. That was why the cold felt like pressure. The others called it a hard winter. Niels began to think of it as a drainage problem. He did not reach that thought quickly. Pride kept him trying ordinary repairs. Shame kept him trying them longer. He watched John Baird, his nearest neighbor, spend 10 days hauling manure against his cabin wall because someone had sworn the heat of rot would protect the sill logs. By New Year, the manure had frozen into a foul black ramp. The frost came through anyway. He watched another family nail rugs over the floor cracks. The rugs froze stiff at the edges. He watched men cut twice the wood and get half the sleep. And in every cabin, the story was the same. Warm faces, frozen feet, sick children, doors that had to be kicked open by mid-morning. Niels had seen this kind of stubbornness before, just with water. A farmer would pile clay against a seep, then curse when the seep came around the side. He would pack more clay, and the water would find another path. He thought the answer was more resistance. The answer was always grade. Give the force a path easier than the one that hurts you. By late August, Niels stopped strengthening the cabin. He walked around it with stakes. Maren watched from the doorway as he paced the perimeter, counting steps under his breath. He set the stakes not tight against the wall, but 6 feet out from it. Then he moved to the north corner, where the ground sat only slightly higher, so slight that most people would have missed it. He drove the first stake, tied twine to it, and pulled the line toward the south arroyo. Lise asked if he was building a fence. No, he said. A cellar? No. Then what? Niels pushed the shovel into the ground. A way out. The work consumed the end of summer. The topsoil was braided with dry grass roots tough as rope. Under it lay powdery clay, then packed gravel that rang under the mattock. Niels cut the trench by inches. He shaved the bottom smooth, then checked the grade, then shaved again. He wanted a fall so gentle that the eye would not notice it, and so steady that a heavy fluid could. 1 inch down over 12 feet. No sudden pockets. No reverse slope. No dead end. Caleb Rusk returned after the first week, this time with 2 men from the road crew. They stood on the county track and watched Niels measure the trench bottom with his twine and plumb bob. Caleb pointed with his glove. "You are too close to the road." Niels did not look up. "It will not take your road. A ditch takes whatever water wants to give it. This one is not for water." Caleb's patience thinned. "Listen to me. If autumn rain comes hard, that cut will soften. If spring melt runs, it will eat the shoulder. Then I have a washed-out road and the county has your foolish hole to thank." Niels crouched, pressed a handful of gravel into the trench bottom, and spoke without raising his voice. "Water may use it, but I did not dig it for water." The road men grinned. Caleb did not. Men in official posts dislike being answered by riddles. "If this collapses," he said, "I will make you fill it." Niels nodded once. Then he kept digging. By October, the trench formed an uneven ring around the cabin, deeper on the north side, shallower where it bent toward the arroyo, always dropping toward the open wash that cut away from the house. Then came the part that made people laugh hardest. He filled it. Not with soil. With stone. He hauled river rock from a dry wash 4 miles away. He sorted the largest stones by hand for the bottom, then filled the gaps with smaller gravel, then covered the top with pale, loose pebbles that made a clean apron around the cabin. From the road, the result looked almost decorative. A stone necklace around a poor man's house. The laughter became easier after that. At least a hole had looked dangerous. A ring of gravel looked vain. But beneath the surface, the trench remained open in all the ways that mattered. Air could fall through the gaps. Heavy air could sink to the bottom. Once there, it could follow the gentle grade around the house and out into the arroyo. Niels had built an interceptor drain. Not for groundwater. For ground-level cold. The first proof came in small things, not dramatic ones. A November night dropped sharp and clear. By dawn, the fields glittered white, and every fence wire wore frost. Maren stepped out of bed and paused. The floor was cold, but not biting. She took another step. Then another. No frost rimmed the plank edges. The water bucket had no ice. The door opened without tearing its own frost seal. Niels said nothing. He only walked outside in the gray light and stood over the gravel ring. A faint white vapor drifted low across the yard. At the edge of the gravel it thinned, bent, and disappeared downward between the stones. He did not smile until Maren came to the doorway and whispered, "It is working." But one mild proof is never enough to change a valley. People notice comfort last. They notice disaster first. The disaster came in December. For 9 straight days, the sky cleared itself of clouds. The sun shone thin and useless. The nights were still. No storm announced itself. No wind warned the families to prepare. The danger was silence. Each sunset, the ground bled heat into the open sky, and each night a deeper lake of cold formed across the basin. On the 4th morning, milk froze in pails inside the bared cabin. On the 6th, a calf died standing beside its mother. On the 8th, Caleb Rusk found his own front door frozen shut from the inside, and had to break the ice with a fire poker before he could get out. By then the thermometer at the trading room had fallen past 30 below zero. People stopped visiting. Dogs stopped barking. Axes rang only when someone had no choice but to split more wood. Smoke rose straight from chimneys and then flattened, trapped under the inversion like a dirty ceiling. Inside the bared cabin, John kept the stove roaring until the iron plates showed dull red. Still, his children sat on the table because the floor hurt too much to stand on. Their window glass carried frost thick enough to scrape with a knife. Every time the door opened it cracked like breaking crockery. Caleb spent the 9th morning walking the road, because duty, stubbornness, and fear all look similar in a hard freeze. He checked coverts. He stamped his feet. He cursed the sky because there was no wind to curse. Near Niels Krogh's claim, he felt something strange. At first he thought it was a draft off the roadbed. Then he stood still. From his ankles to his knees, cold air was moving past him. Not just coldness, movement. A slow, dense current sliding along the ground toward the Krogh cabin. Caleb took one step sideways and the feeling weakened. He stepped back and felt it again. The invisible current followed the shallow fall of the lame, crawled toward the cabin, then bent away from the foundation before it touched it. It spilled into the pale gravel ring and vanished. Caleb crouched. He removed one glove and held his bare fingers above the stones. Air pulled downward through them. Not upward, downward. A steady, delicate breath into the earth. He had spent a lifetime thinking of ditches as things that carried water. But here was a ditch carrying winter. He looked at the cabin. The shock was not that Niels's house looked warm. It did not. It looked like a rough little frontier cabin in a murderous cold. The shock was the foundation. Every other house in the valley had a white beard of frost around the sill logs. Frost clung thickest where the cold pressed hardest, door thresholds, corners, foundation stones, low walls. Niels's sill logs were dark and dry. The frost came across the yard, reached the gravel, and stopped in a clean, almost drawn line. Beyond that line, the house stood bare. Then the door opened. No crack of ice. No shoulder against the frame. No groan of swollen wood. Maren opened it with one hand. Warm lamplight spilled across the threshold. Lisa stood behind her in a wool shift, hair loose, eyes clear. She was not coughing. Caleb straightened slowly, his bare fingers aching now from the cold. Niels stepped out, buttoning his coat. For a moment, neither man spoke. Finally Caleb looked down at the gravel and said, "It drains." Niels nodded. "What?" Niels answered as if the word had been obvious from the beginning. "The night." That sentence traveled faster than any explanation. By noon, Caleb had brought 2 neighbors back to the claim. By evening, 5 men had stood over the gravel ring with their gloves off, each wanting to feel the impossible draft for himself. Someone brought a lantern and held it low. The flame leaned toward the stones. Not because of magic. Because the cold air above the ground was denser than the warmer air trapped higher around it. Because it sought the lowest available path. Because the gravel trench offered an easier route than the cabin foundation. The proof did what arguments had failed to do. It made the invisible visible. Still, practical men do not surrender all at once. John Baird asked why the trench did not simply fill with snow. Niels showed him that loose stone left space even beneath crusted ice. Another man worried about meltwater. Niels pointed to the grade and the arroyo. Caleb asked how deep a trench needed to be. Niels said it depended on the land, the fall, the soil, the house, and the outlet. The answer disappointed them. They wanted a recipe. Niels offered a principle. Do not build a trap for the cold beside your own foundation. Give it somewhere lower to go. That winter did not become easy. No trench could make a high valley gentle. Wood still had to be cut. Livestock still had to be watered. Fingers still split. The sky still took warmth without mercy. But inside the Krogh cabin, life changed in ways too ordinary to sound heroic and too important to ignore. Maren could set bare feet on the floor before dawn. Lisa slept through the night. The water bucket stayed water. The door opened when it was asked to open. By spring, the laughter around the stone necklace had gone quiet. The first neighbor to copy it did not admit he was copying it. He said he had been planning drainage anyway. The second borrowed Niels's plumb bob. The third asked Caleb whether the county had rules about gravel near a cabin wall. Caleb, to his credit, only said, "Make sure it falls away." The next autumn, a half-dozen cabins in that part of the valley wore pale rings of stone. None were identical. Some fed into shallow washes. Some ran under little timber covers. Some were too narrow and had to be widened. Some failed because the grade reversed behind a corner and held frost instead of moving it. Niels helped when asked. He did not lecture. He would squat, scrape the dirt with a stick, and say, "Here, it wants to stop." Stop. The men who had laughed learned that the trick was not the gravel, not the trench, not even the depth. The trick was seeing cold as something with behavior, not an enemy with a will, but a fluid with a path. Years later, people would speak of insulation, vapor barriers, frost lines, air drainage, thermal mass, inversion layers. They would have better terms and better tools. They would also have building codes, instruments, and engineers who could explain on paper what Niels had learned through work. But the lesson itself was older than all of that. A force does not become harmless because you hate it. A river does not stop being a river because you build your house in its bed. And sometimes the smartest solution is not a stronger wall, a hotter fire, or a louder argument. Sometimes the smartest solution is a quiet channel in the ground, cut at the right slope, leading away from the thing you love. Niels Krogh did not defeat winter. He noticed that even winter obeyed gravity. And once he understood that, he did the one thing nobody else in the valley had thought to do. He let the cold leave. This story is a fictionalized frontier tale built around a real physical principle: cold air drainage. It is not construction advice, and any modern building or drainage work should follow local codes and professional guidance. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more forgotten lessons in practical intelligence. And tell us in the comments, where have you seen a problem solved, not by force, but by giving it a better path?